On January 19, 1945, Chief Engineer Kenji Tanaka stood in the heart of a graveyard. It was not a graveyard of men, but of dreams. The air over Kagamigahara was thick with the acrid smell of burnt oil and pulverized concrete. Tanaka, a man whose life was defined by the clean lines of mathematics and the elegant logic of aerodynamics, pulled his worn coat tighter against the biting winter wind. Just days before, this spot had been the beating heart of the Kawasaki Aircraft Company, the birthplace of the Ha-140 engine, the most advanced liquid-cooled aircraft engine in the Japanese Empire. Now, it was a mangled ruin of twisted steel girders and frozen ash, the result of a devastating visit from a wave of American B-29 superfortresses. The silver demons that haunted Japan's skies had done their work with terrifying precision. Tanaka walked through the wreckage, his footsteps the only sound, and his gaze fell upon the one part of the factory the bombs hadn't touched. Lined up in the undamaged assembly halls, stretching back into the shadows, sat 275 perfect, brand-new Ki-61 Hien fighter planes. They were beautiful, sleek, and utterly useless. They were 275 magnificent, predatory birds, all waiting for a heart that no longer existed. The factory that built their engines was gone. These silent, gleaming airframes were orphans, a testament to a broken industrial dream. They were a symbol of Japan's fatal vulnerability, a perfect weapon with a fatal flaw. Tanaka could almost hear them, a silent scream for the skies they were built to defend, skies now owned by the enemy. This was not just a production problem, it was a spiritual crisis. A staff car, black and imposing, crunched over the debris and skidded to a halt. General Kenshiro Abe of the Army Air Service emerged, his face a mask of grim impatience. He was not a man who cared for engineering excuses or the poetry of a broken factory. He saw only the B-29s, day after day, burning the heart out of his country. He jabbed a gloved finger, not at the wreckage, but at the rows of silent fighters. "Tanaka," he barked, his voice cutting the cold air. "How many?" Tanaka, his eyes still on the empty engine mounts of the nearest plane, replied in a hollow voice, 275, General. All complete. But we have no more engines. The Ha-140 line is finished." General Abe stared at him, his eyes void of sympathy. "I do not care about the Ha-140, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "I do not care what engine you use. I am not asking you to build a perfect aircraft. I am ordering you to build a fighter. Those planes," he pointed again, "will fly. I have B-29s burning Osaka, and you have 275 fighters sitting on the ground. Find an engine, find any engine, and make them fly. You have 1 month. With that, he spun on his heel, returned to his car, and was gone, leaving Tanaka alone with the ghosts and an impossible, terrifying command. The clock was ticking, and the fate of hundreds of air crews, and perhaps Japan itself, rested on his shoulders. Tanaka convened his engineering team in a makeshift, unheated office. Among them was his best young designer, Hiroshi Ito, a pragmatic and brilliant man who saw problems not as barriers, but as equations to be solved. The mood was one of despair. "It's madness," one senior engineer muttered. "The Ki-61 is a masterpiece of balance. It was designed around the Ha-140. It's a greyhound, a thoroughbred. You can't just put a different engine in it." Tanaka looked at Ito. "Hiroshi, the inventory. What do we have? What is available right now in any quantity?" Ito flipped through his ledger, his pencil tapping. "Nothing liquid-cooled, sir." "Nothing with that kind of profile. The only engine we can get in numbers, the only one, is the Mitsubishi Ha-112-2. A stunned silence fell over the room. The Ha-112 was a radial engine, a 14-cylinder, air-cooled, brute force piece of machinery. It was a good engine, reliable and powerful, powering the Ki-49 Hien bomber and the A6M0's successors. But it was fat. It was a bulky, round, short-nosed engine. The Ki-61, by contrast, was defined by its slim, elegant, liquid-cooled nose, inspired by the German Messerschmitt 109. Its very identity was its German-designed Daimler-Benz engine, the Ha-140. To suggest mating the Ki-61 airframe with a radial engine was heresy. A radial? The senior engineer scoffed. Do you know what that will do to the aerodynamics? The drag, my God, the drag will be catastrophic. We'll be lucky if it's faster than a biplane. It's like trying to fit the head of a bulldog onto the body of a cheetah. It's grotesque. Tanaka let the objections wash over him. He walked to a blackboard and drew a rough sketch of the Ki-61's profile. Then he erased the long, slim nose and sketched a large, round circle in its place. The general did not ask for a beautiful aircraft, Tanaka said, his voice firm. He did not ask for an aerodynamically perfect aircraft. He asked for a fighter. This engine, he tapped the circle, is available. This airframe, he tapped the sleek body, is available. This is no longer a design problem. This is a surgery problem. Hiroshi, you will lead the team. Take the first airframe. Cut it. Do whatever you must, but make it fit. And do it now. We do not have the luxury of time. The challenge was monumental. The Ki-61's fuselage was a slim, stressed skim monocoque, never intended to accommodate the massive 46.5-inch diameter of the Ha-112. Ito and his team worked around the clock, fueled by adrenaline, green tea, and a growing sense of desperate determination. They were mechanics, surgeons, and sculptors all at once. They physically cut away the front end of the Ki-61, right where the slim inline engine was meant to be. They had to design an entirely new, complex, tubular engine mount to hold the heavy radial. The center of gravity, the delicate balance that makes a fighter flyable, was thrown completely out of whack. The Ha-112 was shorter than the Ha-140, but it was also significantly lighter. This was the first accidental discovery. The German engine was a complex, heavy piece of machinery. The radial was simpler. But the real weight savings, Ito realized with a jolt, wasn't just the engine itself. It was everything that went with it. Gone was the entire liquid cooling system. Gone were the heavy wing radiators, the intricate network of pipes and plumbing, the hundreds of pounds of glycol coolant that had to be carried. All of it. Gone. The team had to hand-hammer a new cowling, a bulged, rounded piece of metal that wrapped around the radial engine cylinders, trying to blend it as best they could with the Ki-61's narrow fuselage. It was an ugly, desperate fix. They had to reroute the oil coolers and create a new, gaping intake underneath the cowling, giving the plane a distinctive, almost comical beard. Every day, Tanaka would inspect the work. Every day, the senior engineer who had scoffed would shake his head, muttering about drag and instability. "It will fly like a pig, if it flies at all," he'd say. But as Ito and his team worked, they started to feel something else. The new aircraft, stripped of its heavy cooling system, felt lighter, more focused. The weight was now concentrated forward, closer to the center of the aircraft. They weren't just bolting on an engine. They were fundamentally, accidentally, re-engineering the entire plane. Finally, after just 12 days of frantic, non-stop work, the first hybrid was complete. It was rolled out of the hangar on the freezing morning of February 1st, 1945. It didn't have a name yet. It was just a Ki-61, mutilated and reformed. It looked strange, powerful but awkward, a hybrid, a mutt, a creature of pure improvisation. The sleek body of the Swallow now had the blunt, aggressive, powerful nose of a brawler. General Abe was there, his arms crossed, his face unreadable. The man chosen to fly it was Major Yasuhiko Kuroe, one of the Army's most experienced and respected test pilots. Kuroe was a combat veteran, a man who understood the soul of a fighter plane. He'd flown them all, the nimble Ki-43, the fast Ki-84. He had even flown the Ki-61 extensively, and, while he respected its speed and firepower, he'd always disliked its heavy, sluggish controls at high speed, and its poor maneuverability compared to its Allied counterparts. He walked around the new creation, his expression one of deep, professional skepticism. He ran a hand over the rough-looking new cowling. He peered at the massive propeller. He shook his head, then climbed into the familiar Ki-61 cockpit. He strapped in, gave a curt nod, and started the engine. The sound that erupted was not the high-strung, nervous whine of the inline HA-140. It was a deep, guttural, earth-shaking roar, the roar of the Mitsubishi radial. The entire airframe trembled with a new kind of power. Kuroe taxied onto the runway, the plane feeling nose-heavy but solid. He pushed the throttle forward, and the beast leapt. It didn't accelerate, it exploded. The plane, now significantly lighter and powered by an engine with massive low-end torque, tore down the runway and rocketed into the air, at a climb angle that stunned the engineers on the ground. Kuroe was pushed back into his seat, his mind reeling. This wasn't a pig, this was an eagle. In the air, the revelation began. Kuroe, expecting a heavy, unresponsive aircraft, tentatively banked. The plane responded instantly. The controls, which had been so heavy in the original Ki-61, now felt light, crisp, and responsive. He rolled the aircraft. It was beautiful, a perfect axial roll that was faster than he'd ever felt in a Hien. He pulled it into a tight loop. The plane held the turn without complaint, the G-forces building, the radial engine roaring, pulling him up and over. A smile, a rare thing for Major Kuroe, cracked his lips. This was not a compromise. This was not a stopgap. This was, against all logic, a better airplane. He brought the new fighter, now designated the Ki-100, in for a perfect landing. He unstrapped, his movements deliberate, and walked over to Tanaka and General Abe, who were waiting, breathless. Kuroe pulled off his helmet, a look of profound astonishment on his face. "General," he said, his voice full of respect, "it's a masterpiece. It's delightful to fly. It climbs like a rocket, and it turns like nothing I've ever flown." He turned to Tanaka. "Whatever you did, Tanaka-san, you didn't just save this airframe. You perfected it. It is, I believe, superior to the Hien in every way that matters in a dogfight." Tanaka and Ito looked at each other, a dawning realization in their eyes. In their desperate, panicked rush, in their act of engineering butchery, they had accidentally stumbled upon a miracle. They had fixed the Ki-61, By removing the heavy, complex cooling system, they had shed nearly 700 pounds of weight, mostly from the wings and rear fuselage. This weight loss, combined with the new, lighter engine, didn't just make the plane lighter. It fundamentally changed its entire character. It improved the climb rate, the acceleration, and, most critically, the maneuverability. They had, by sheer accident, created what might be the finest all-around interceptor of the war. General Abe was not a man to waste a miracle. He gave the order, full production, build them as fast as you can cut and weld. But he had one more test. The Army had a prized possession at their Fusa, now Yokota, test facility. A captured, fully operational American P-51 Mustang. The Mustang was the king of the skies, the aircraft that was systematically dismantling the Luftwaffe over Europe and had swept the Japanese Army's best fighters from the skies over the Philippines and China. It was fast, heavily armed, and could outfly almost anything. "I want to know what we have," Abe ordered Kuroe. "Take the Ki-100, fight the Mustang, and do not lose." A few days later, Major Kuroe found himself at 20,000 feet, flying parallel to the captured P-51, flown by another Japanese veteran. This was the ultimate test. The Mustang, with its laminar flow wings and powerful Merlin engine, was a portrait of deadly high-speed perfection. The Ki-100, with its hybrid body and bulldog nose, was the underdog, the accidental creation. The mock dogfight began. As the brief had predicted, the P-51 was faster. In a straight, level race, the Mustang slowly, inexorably pulled away. Kuroe kicked his rudder, and the Ki-100 responded instantly, snapping out of the line of fire. The Mustang screamed past, its speed its greatest asset. But then the Mustang pilot made a mistake. He tried to engage in a turning fight. He pulled his P-51 into a hard banking turn, trying to get on Kuroe's tail. Kuroe smiled. He pulled back on his own stick, and the Ki-100, with its lighter airframe and improved center of gravity, seemed to pivot in the air. Kuroe pulled his turn tighter, and tighter, and tighter still. He watched with a grim satisfaction as the sleek silver P-51, the terror of the skies, failed to keep up. The Ki-100 was turning inside the Mustang, effortlessly. Kuroe's nose was now pointing at the Mustang's tail, and the American plane, for all its power, could not shake him. He held his position, locked onto the Mustang's 6 o'clock, a perfect, unmissable shot. The fight was over. They broke off and climbed to try again, and again the same result. If the Mustang ran, it could escape. But if it stayed to fight, if it dared to turn, the Ki-100 would kill it. Kuroe landed, his heart pounding with a fierce pride. The verdict was undeniable. The Ki-100, the accidental masterpiece born from rubble and desperation, could outturn the P-51 Mustang. Test pilots would later claim that in the hands of an equally skilled pilot, the rugged, reliable, and astonishingly agile Ki-100 was superior even to Japan's own top-rated fighter, the complex and often maintenance-plagued Ki-84 Hien. The Ki-100 was rushed into service in the final, desperate months of the war. It was given the Allied code name Tony, the same as the Ki-61 it was born from, a fact that would lead to deadly confusion for American pilots who expected a sluggish, heavy fighter, and instead found themselves in a turning fight with a buzzsaw. The Ki-100s were thrown into the inferno, tasked with the most terrifying job imaginable, intercepting the B-29 Super Fortress. On the 25th of July, 1945, Lieutenant Jiro Sasaki, a young pilot with only a handful of hours in the new fighter, found himself climbing to 28,000 feet over central Honshu. He was part of a formation of 18 Ki-100s from the 244th Sentai. His hands were slick with sweat inside his gloves. Below him, he could see the glint of the sun on the B-29s flying mountains of silver, untouchable, arrogant. But today they were not alone. A swarm of American Navy F-6F Hellcats, tough, rugged, and flown by veteran pilots, moved in to protect their charges. Jiro's squadron leader, a veteran named Captain Kobayashi, dove his Ki-100 into the American formation. "Do not follow them in a dive." Kobayashi's voice crackled over the radio. "Engage them. Turn. Turn and fight." Jiro felt a jolt of panic as a Hellcat, its 6.50 caliber guns winking, flashed past his canopy. He instinctively pulled back on the stick, kicking his rudder, and the Ki-100 responded beautifully, wrapping him in a tight high G turn. The Hellcat pilot, surprised by the Ki-100's agility, tried to follow. Jiro was terrified, but he remembered Major Kuroe's report, which was now gospel among the new pilots. Trust the turn. He held his turn, the G-forces crushing him into his seat, his vision graying at the edges. The Hellcat couldn't hold it. Jiro saw his opening, the Hellcat's broad, dark blue wing filling his gun sight. He fired, his two 20mm cannons and two 12.7mm machine guns erupting in a deafening roar. He saw bright flashes as his shells struck the Hellcat's wing root. The American plane wobbled, broke off the attack, and dove away, trailing smoke. The sky was a swirling, chaotic melee. It was not a one-sided victory. The Hellcat pilots were too good, their planes too tough. But when Jiro Sasaki landed his Ki-100, his hands shaking so badly he could barely unstrap his helmet, he knew one thing for certain. The Ki-100 was not a joke. It was not a stopgap. It was a true warrior. That day, both sides would claim victories, but the Japanese pilots had met the enemy's best on equal terms, in a fighter born from ashes. The war ended just a few weeks later. The Ki-100, of which only 390 were ever built, could not change the inevitable tide of history. It was too little, too late. But the story of its creation remains one of the greatest testaments to pragmatic, crisis-driven engineering in the history of aviation. It was an accident. It was an improvisation. It was the result of a desperate general and a brilliant engineer who were willing to try the impossible. From the ruins of a bombed-out factory, from 275 silent, soulless airframes, Kenji Tanaka and his team had forged a masterpiece. They had accidentally created one of the finest, most balanced, and most agile dogfighters of the Second World War, a plane that could, in the right hands, defeat the very best the Allies had to offer. The Ki-100 is a shining example that sometimes the best designs aren't born from years of careful planning. Sometimes they are born from necessity, from the simple, desperate refusal to give up.